we started kind of top down, centralized. I was using like Mid-Journey. It's an echo chamber. It's only people talking about Farcaster or Ethereum. While the network was still kind of invite only, there was basically no spam. We found a small group of people on the network that are extremely passionate about channels. It's actually been pretty inspiring to see people kind of the creativity that they can bring to this. And I think one thing that's been challenging for us is we've never quite figured out how to make this a replicable playbook.
I really wanted to get into, just into Farcaster channels when they were launched. Firstly, was it June 7th or was it before?
I honestly couldn't tell you. I know it's 2 years ago, which feels like a lifetime ago. And yeah, I'm happy to give you the context of what our thinking was at the time, and then we can work our way through the evolution of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go.
Yeah, so we were network was still permissioned, if I'm correct in my thinking there. I think that's right. Yeah. And so we hadn't opened things up. It was still the era of like, you'd send me a DM on Twitter and I'd respond with sure best email. And so network probably something like 10 or 20,000 people, give or take. And I think one critique that people had about Farcaster, I mean, there were plenty of them, but at the time, I think one consistent one was it's an echo chamber. It's only people talking about Farcaster or Ethereum, and no one else is talking about any other topics. And so I think where we were hoping to achieve, and we started with two channels. One was for Farcon, and then the other, actually, there were like three in a short period. It was Purple, which was this kind of community organized DAO at the time on Farcaster, and then the second one was Farcon, which was the original one in Boston, organized by Grin and Cameron. And then the third was we did a game 5 of the NBA Finals. And we were just trying to encourage people to talk about like a topic that wasn't necessarily whatever the monoculture was. Granted, if you think about like Purple and Farcon are both kind of Farcaster oriented topics, but it was kind of like a natural extension of like, okay, there's a group of people who want to talk about a specific topic, like can we do that? And it ended up working out pretty well, to the point where in July we ended up launching a bunch more, and we started kind of top down, centralized. I was using like Mid-Journey to create like very simple icons, which if you look at some of them now, they're like comically bad, but that was the state of like the kind of image generation AI technology at the time. But like books, they all have a distinct thing where it's like they had like a solid color background, and then kind of whatever the icon. Some of the city ones have some like San Francisco and New York, and so we added a bunch over the course of July and August, and things were working pretty well with them. But I think the big thing that we weren't anticipating is while the network was still kind of invite only, there was basically no spam. So these things were kind of like anyone could participate in them. They were kind of this like idealized version of hashtags. You could go to a page and be like, oh, actually the LA or New York page has like good recommendations, or I kind of have a sense of what's going on for a relatively small community. We opened the network up later in the fall, and I think quickly channels became overrun with there's a variety of different things going on. There's like outright spam, and there's some people who basically kind of like maybe a little enthusiastic about joining the network and are not kind of like taking the time to understand norms or whatever. And I think channels kind of like quickly needed some level of moderation. So we started to kind of like add that. And then we got into kind of this mode where we basically were like, okay, let's find channel leads, like people who can actually kind of like garden these communities. And I think that's where the primitive started to move from what is more or less like a simplified or nice version of a hashtag to this kind of a community primitive, which I think we've since done 2 other big iterations. But what's interesting about channels is, and I'll kind of wrap it up here, and we can go to the next question, is we found a small group of people on the network that are extremely passionate about channels, and they've built like phenomenally interesting and unique and varied things using this, what I think is a pretty rudimentary organizational tool, and the tools have gotten a little more sophisticated over time, but for the most part it's pretty simple. And so it's just actually been pretty inspiring to see people kind of the creativity that they can bring to this. And I think one thing that's been challenging for us is we've never quite figured out how to make this a replicable playbook. It's like, how do we get more, Humpties and Peaches and all the different people who have like kind of like built real communities with channels. Like, how do we build this into the product so that if you're relatively new to Farcaster, or you hear about it, you either are seamlessly kind of like figuring out what communities that get you interested, and then more importantly, I think for us, which we've never really figured out, is how do we get the next 100 or 1,000 channel creators? Because I really think running a community, creator is not even honestly the right term in my view. It's entrepreneur, right? Like running a community, and I have a sense for this because if you think of like Farcaster is itself like a big meta channel, like it requires a lot of work, and kind of you are this like quasi politician and entrepreneur, and so that is kind of the state of where we are. But I think like the humble origins were very much in a, hey, can we get people to talk about different topics on Farcaster? And at this point, I think there are something like 14,000 channels. I mean, most of them, just like Reddit, don't have a ton of activity, or they kind of are dormant. But there are, a set, that top 1% or top 5% that do definitely have people participating. And yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say, Dan, I mean, to the extent we're trying to add a lot more texture to the platform through channels, you guys have definitely succeeded. Y- I think, it might get harder and harder or I don't want to say harder, but, for new ideas to spring up, but like general topics that everyone tends to be at least somewhat interested in. You have, politics, you have sports, that people regularly check in. I feel like those are, people naturally gravitate towards those. And as I would think too, like as a new user, when you come first land on Farcaster, it might be nice to know, oh, these are the main pockets that, if I'm interested in philosophy, or I'm interested in books, like those are the places I can land first and find my people first before I spread out. So I definitely think, you guys have succeeded on this. So tell us a little bit more about how you see channels going from here. I know there's been some interest, there's been some community discussions about, how you guys should implement moving forward.
Yeah, so very much active discussions. I actually created a group this week with a bunch of people who responded to a cast that I had. Um, I, I think what's been challenging for us with channels is if we start with the overall priority for what we as the kind of like core Farcaster team are trying to optimize for, we are trying to focus on new user growth and getting more people to sign up for Farcaster and then stick around. So it's kind of like a 1-2. It's like they need to hear about Farcaster, or it's actually 3 steps. Hear about Farcaster and be excited enough to sign up, and then get to an experience in literally like the first minute after signing up that is going to be compelling enough that they may come back the next day and the next day and the next day. And that's how social networks grow, right? Like user retention is the thing to focus on. And I think what's challenging is to date, we haven't been able to, and this is not for lack of trying, I've spent more time on channels than any other feature, figure out how to tie channels into that loop. So we've tried channels as part of kind of like the recommended feed for onboarding. We've tried invite your friend to Farcaster and then include a membership to the channel with it. So there've been a bunch of different iterations, and it's not to say that there's like one more iteration we could do that could suddenly make it work, but I think where it's been tricky is if we actually talk to new users, channels are just a very confusing concept, because it's like this app feels very much like Twitter. So people have a preconceived notion of what the app should be like. It's like, oh, I just post and great, like I get distribution or whatever. But channels are this like Reddit thing, and now there's membership, and like each one is different, and some feel like topics, which like, okay, should I be able to post in food? Sure. But if you have a very specific community that's like, you need to buy the NFT here, and this is the set of norms and rules that we have, the same primitive doing both is actually probably pretty confusing for people. Because if they anchor towards their topics, then I should be able to post in anyone that I want. Or if they're communities, then it's actually, no, it's probably more proof of work based, because a good community isn't just necessarily open out of the gate to everyone. It's like you assimilate into the community a bit, right? And so I think that's been a bit tricky for us. But here's the thing, like there are, like I said before, a small group of extremely passionate Farcasters who've built communities on Farcaster. And so ripping that out of Farcaster and saying, sorry, the thing didn't work, that doesn't also feel good. And so we're a bit of a holding pattern. And I think one thing that's creating a bit of catalyst, which is exciting, is Sahil and the kind of like open rank Cura team are pretty serious about channels. Frankly, despite me saying, hey, I don't know if these things actually work, like in terms of a bet. And they're pretty insistent on that they believe they can. And so they're working on a proposal, and I'm giving them feedback on it, where I've been pretty clear. If we can come up with a way to simplify some of the mechanics around channels, we can actually push them entirely into the protocol. And I think there's a big misconception that channels are not decentralized. Channels from day one have been decentralized on a lot of core things that matter, like the content. Like anyone else can like interpret kind of at the protocol level. You could go build a client permissionlessly with channels, etc. The thing that we have yet to decentralize, and we've done iterations on, is what I'd call the metadata. It's like kind of like the config or the settings of like how the channel works, and then membership lists and some of that, and then channel creation. And so that's still important and stuff that we want to resolve. But that's actually what I would say is like that part. If we can actually get to a simplified version that can work pretty quickly into the protocol, then there's a version of the world where we can actually kind of what I would say is like unlock or release or stop holding back the development of channels, because that metadata right now is kind of very much like an opinionated thing that our app has. And then it allows, an open rank, Cura, some other mini app developer, net new client developer, they can kind of go wild with this. And I actually think the other one to call out is Zapper. Is a wallet that's integrating the Farcaster protocol, similar to what Coinbase Wallet is doing. And they've taken the approach of, because again, channels themselves from the beginning have had this flexible on-protocol primitive. It's called FIP2. They're using that for any token. So the idea is like you can just spin up a kind of community chat effectively, or like feed off of a CA, like a contract address for a token. So that actually needs to mesh with what we've had with channels in the primitive. And so I think I'm optimistic that there's a path forward here in the next kind of like couple months where we can actually do a concentrated sprint. I think people aren't going to get everything they want. So this is something that it started with this group, but I'm going to start kind of publicly soliciting is one tension is what people want is they want a bunch of new features for channels, completely reasonable. But then they want the features also implemented in the Farcaster app. So basically they want us to, whatever features get developed, they want us to put into the app and maintain the surface area. And I think the challenge of that is just we're a small team and we have a set of priorities that we're very focused on in terms of top line user growth. And so it's a bit of like want your cake and eat it too, where it's like, well, you want the innovation that's going to happen from other apps and clients, but then that is effectively getting added to our roadmap to implement, and that to us is not a good thing, in the sense that like what you want the core Farcaster team is like to have full freedom to like focus on whatever we think the set of priorities are, and if we can get it out of our app in the like kind of like messy situation it is now, while still having some what I would say simplified or basic functionality for channels in the main app, I think that probably is the best thing. But that's a bit of like people need to be willing to compromise a bit, right? Like they can't say, no, I want all the innovation to happen, but I do not want you to change anything that's in the existing app now.
There's something you mentioned that to me just kind of hit. I mean, there's a lot of things. I'm taking notes here and I'm like, which one do I pick? Because they're all so good. But this idea of like channel owners being entrepreneurs, I think in the new group chat that you started, someone said something that just totally like made me react in a really positive way, where they said a lot of these entrepreneurs, before they even start a mini app, right, or anything that where they're trying to attract users that there's going to be a high cost of development, they usually start a channel. So it's really interesting what the flow looks like in terms of like getting attention on Farcaster, driving that attention to a curated conversation like you can have in channels, and then building with those users in mind, right? Like finding your core audience. I think channels actually works really well for that. Do you have any thoughts besides it just working that way in terms of like how you see entrepreneurs when whatever form channels exist in the future using that?
Yeah. So look, the biggest channel on the network is base, right? And so base was like early to the primitive, especially was as frames were coming out. I think they really doubled down on Farcaster. Coinbase is now integrating Farcaster into the Coinbase wallet. So I think that is like textbook of like, okay, this is a primitive that can work. Um, I think one challenging component, and it kind of always goes back to this a bit, is as a channel scales to tens of thousands of users, and you have a lot of excited folks who want to participate, get part of the distribution of that channel, which we've changed how that works over time, and I think we could have done a better job being clear for people. But it creates a lot of moderation work, and I think it's just like a fundamental challenge of internet-based communities that the easiest way to think about this is order of magnitude. Managing a one-person community is easy. It's you. Like, you just get to decide what you do. 10, okay, that's probably like you probably have a personal relationship with everyone. 100, you're probably starting to get to a place where you're going to need some norms that, yeah, you probably can still roughly know everyone in your community to a certain degree, but like, it's getting big. 1,000, you know, if you believe this like Dunbar number of 150, like you basically don't know everyone in a 1,000-person community, and then certainly by the time you hit 10,000 or 100,000, it's a different kind of beast. And anyone who's run a Discord server or a group chat, or like as a group increases, the complexity of managing and modding goes up actually probably non-linearly, in the sense that like you just have the number of connections between people and opportunities for people to get mad at each other or misbehave goes up pretty dramatically. And so I think that is something also to consider. And so for someone starting something new, this like cozy feel or kind of like building a community, it's great. Like you can probably ride that, I would say, relative to a group chat. Like you can get into the 100 to 1,000 a lot easier with a feed-based community than you can with just like, hey, join my Telegram group or join my Discord or whatever. And so for new things, like just getting to your first 100 or 1,000, like people who are even just vaguely interested, that's actually pretty great. But I do think that the challenge is, as things scale, you just going back to this like nonlinear like amount of work required to manage, and I don't think we've cracked that. And there have been tools, and Automod was an amazing thing by JT GI for a while, and then kind of we're changing the direction. And reasonably, he's like, hey, I don't know if I want to keep investing in this. He open sourced it. People are able to Howl, I think, like forked it or whatever, which is great. But like part of this is like you actually need someone who's dedicating full time to constantly improving and like offering the knobs. It's a rare instance where with channel like entrepreneurs, owners, mods, you actually want as many knobs as possible because everyone has a slightly different point of view. And I think it's actually a pretty opposed to how we've traditionally built things, because our focus is almost always solve for the default, like make it easy for the average user, fewer knobs, like just like get the right choice. And so I think it actually makes a lot of sense in a world where something like Cura that is dedicated to channels and community management is going to have maybe a different product philosophy that will actually satisfy people who are trying to build community with channels. And so I think that is, in an optimistic view, like that's why I want to get to a nice resolution where we've simplified it in the Farcaster app. That's really about providing you distribution, which I actually think is useful for people to grow things. But like the power features, the things that you really care about for your core community, probably should live in a slightly different, kind of UI, UX, different app. And the beauty of Farcaster is like you can simultaneously use both, right?
I wonder if. Oh, sorry, Russ. I'm just going to ask a question here because you've kind of touched on it. If you could speak on the difference between decentralized and on chain, because I think it's decentralized at the protocol level, but it doesn't mean that it's on chain. So it's, I think on Farcaster at least, if I'm not mistaken, the only thing that's on chain are the FIDs, right? Would you say that in the future channels will be on chain or decentralized?
Yeah, so the way to think about it is just because it's on chain doesn't mean it's decentralized, and just because it's decentralized, um, you know, like uh, that it. Well, I actually think decentralized is like a broader category, like actually in the sense that like it is, you can have things that are decentralized that are not on chain, like Blue Sky, Mastodon. That is a decentralized architecture for a social network that has nothing to do with blockchain. Um, and so the way I think about it is FIDs, as you point out, the kind of core identity primitive under the hood for Farcaster users is the thing that's on chain, and that there's like actually a specific set of properties that's really nice about a blockchain that allows you to kind of have sovereign control over like the core identity primitive for yourself. You can have kind of the recovery process, all this stuff that we've kind of tried to abstract away from most users. You can actually go do that. So that's, I think, pretty powerful. I suspect that there's a version of channels. You could just think of it as like, FID is Farcaster ID, CID, right? Like a channel ID. And then this actually would solve some of the issues. Like people have wanted to rename their channel. Well, the way the channels work now is like they were pretty simply implemented. And like having a CID would allow you to say, oh, in the same way that you can change your Farcaster username or swap in your ENS, you could do the same thing for a channel, right? Because instead of following the username, you're actually following like this kind of like ID number. Again, all this is like esoteric at the protocol level, but it's important because it allows for that kind of flexibility. And so I think that's like one basic example. I do think over the medium term, and this is not just for channels, but I think more broadly, L2s have basically gotten ridiculously cheap. And I think that there's probably more stuff that we can slowly kind of either mirror or move out of the protocol, or not move out of the protocol, or shift where it exists. I don't know if it's a priority or if it like, sounds good. And then the reality is like Snapchain actually can just do this really well. And like Snapchain itself is, completely decentralized in the sense of like read access and ability to kind of participate in it. And so I think, I think this has actually always been a point of contention from like the beginning of like Farcaster is actually not decentralized because it's not on chain. And it's like, okay, there are crypto social network protocols that are entirely on chain, yet they don't have any users. And so it's like, who cares? Like it's a science experiment at that point. So I think a bit of like what we are trying to do is be as pragmatic as possible. And it's much faster to not put stuff on chain because once stuff is on chain, it just takes a long time to iterate. And then similarly, once stuff is in Snapchain, it takes a long time to iterate. Thus, why channels have stuck around as like kind of this thing in the Farcaster app, because it allowed us when we were spending more time on it to change things pretty easily on our end. But I do think it's getting to the point where it's like we need to make a call here, and it's not a unilateral call. It's not a sudden call. It's a like get a bunch of input from people, make sure those folks can offer their point of view, but also get to a place where people are probably not going to get 100% of what they want. But if we all agree that, hey, we're gonna kind of move forward in this direction and simplify certain things, but allow for kind of permissionless innovation within other clients, I think that's probably the right compromise.
This idea that when you were talking about how people want to be specific, they want to have different knobs. I think of this idea that with interesting products, they tend to be easy to navigate, but capable of being mastered. And with Farcaster now being both the name of the app and the protocol, that really offers this ability, right? You guys can innovate on both levels. You can make the user interface easy to navigate, but you can open up possibilities on the protocol level for other people to master and for other people to kind of present it in any kind of way they want. And so that is awesome for Farcaster. But I wanted to loop back. I know we have just 2 more minutes here, but to loop back on just one more point when you said earlier about aligning the interests of Farcaster, maybe talking about the user interface and attracting more users, and aligning that with making sure that as soon as the users get onboarded, there is a textured tapestry of content that they can get that they can grasp onto so that they can be sticky. Um, if not for channels, as of like 2 months ago, maybe if we were thinking about leaning away from channels, how would we otherwise have solved that to make the feed a little bit more diverse and maybe personalized?
Yeah, so we were constantly running experiments with our algo, which I think has like a lot of baggage with that word. The the way to think about it though is AI is actually, you know, it's obviously amazing and it's done all this stuff. But traditionally, the LLM world really actually didn't improve like feed technology. Like that's actually a different branch of AI. It's machine learning. Like what powers the TikTok algo or Meta's algos. Um, but that's changing because LLMs are actually getting so smart and so smart. Put quotes on that and cheap, right? So DeepSeek and like if you think about it, like okay, we now have O3 on ChatGPT, like 4.0 a year ago was blowing people's minds. That price per query is going way down. So one thing we're doing, we're actually experimenting with this in trending topics. So we're working on getting better at this. Like we had 4 different trending topics yesterday. I think it was like whatever the showdown that was happening on X, the Switch 2, Circle IPO, and then NBA Finals, right? That was all just auto categorized. It actually didn't take anything from channels. And that's just an LLM kind of going through, casts that get some level of engagement. You can think of it as just like we ask an LLM, we feed it the entire cast, including an image, and say, what's this about? Give us 5 keywords. It's an oversimplified version of that. And what's important is so much of what a cast is 2 things that I think are tricky traditionally, or same thing with a tweet, is one, you have an image, right? So like traditionally, like the ML like only can really look at the text and it's not going to be able to look at an image, whereas you can actually you can have the LLM like look at it and it does visual recognition, then it can like connect the image to the text, right? And then the second is a lot of what a tweet or a cast has is there's a lot of like subcontext that you and I, because we're like online and we've read a bunch of other things, like you can kind of like roughly know, oh, this is in like subtle reference to the meta. Like I always think of like if you look at an average 6 cast, if he's talking about like something that's happening today, like it's expected that like what's going on first, and then that is responding to that. The LLMs are actually decent, not perfect, but like decent at doing that. And so I'm optimistic that here's the vision. The kind of mixing topics and communities is the fundamental like original sin of channels. And I think a world where topics are inferred, and that can happen in a channel or not in a channel. You can be the biggest account, you can be the smallest, but ultimately like you can actually kind of categorize with AI this stuff, and then based on what people either tell you they're interested in or the revealed preference of like liking and spending time on casts, like you can get more of that. And then channels, I think the thing that's valuable about channels is being able to build communities, which they're not actually topics. They are communities that might have a theme or something that they're, like organized around. And that can still feed into algos and get discovered. But I actually think like if I give everyone a choice, it's like build a community product or push this into the protocol as a way so that you can actually build a community, or this thing is if you're interested in X topic, like a way to get discovered. I actually think most people who are serious about channels today, despite them kind of being in this holding pattern, they're going to vote overwhelmingly in the community path. And so I think you can solve both, but in different tactics, which I think it'll take some unlearning, and that will be challenging. But if we can do that right, it's you find like-minded people at a topic level just through the algo. And I know that sounds kind of crazy. And then when you find those people and you want to go deeper and you actually are looking for the human interaction on that, right? Imagine if you have like gardening, right? Ted, you can stay on, Ted. Like I'm just finishing up. I'm doing one of my rants. But you could imagine I come to the network, I'm interested in gardening, I like a few casts, and then I'm starting to see more people in gardening related communities, and then I actually find the right one. It's like gardening in Brooklyn, or like, DIY like farmers at home, or whatever the right like group, and you really vibe with that subgroup. That's great. So you're not joining this like mega sized like subreddit equivalent of gardening. Instead, you're actually finding your people within that topic. And I think that is the thing that would be great if we could drive towards it, but it does require us to kind of like make a call and bring people along, and make sure, they feel like they're contributing to that decision as well.
This has been awesome, Dan. I know you've given us 30 minutes of your time today, and I know you're extremely busy. So I want to say thank you. This has been really fun to dive into channels, but really more broadly, building community on Farcaster, and your insights and the thinking that's happening behind the scenes. I think our audience was very grateful for your time too, and for the ability to learn the direction that we're going together. Because though you guys are in the office building Farcaster, we feel that we are co-building with you, and we appreciate the opportunity to speak to you.
Awesome. Well, I very much am appreciative of everyone who spends time on Farcaster, because you're 100% right in that. I mean, it's a social network, right? So there's no building in isolation. You can build all the technology you want, but people don't use it and like actually, build friendships and communities and spend time on it. Nothing. It's like that line from OpenAI. OpenAI is nothing without its people. It's like a social network is nothing without its people. So, all right. Cheers, guys.